Good morning. It's January 7th. This is To My Liberal Friends. One of the major issues in the last election was border security and illegal immigration. During the Biden years in office, some estimates are that as many as 10 million people crossed the border. It went from a border state issue to a national issue as migrants moved to cities across the nation. The cost incurred by these migrants has grown into billions of dollars. These costs include housing, food, medical care, and education of children. At the local level, it drains resources and money from other educational programs that benefited the citizen students. Schools were forced to deal with multiple languages. The offshoot of the last election was Donald Trump capitalized on the growing opposition to the wave of migrants at the border. He promised to secure the border on day one of his administration and to begin a program of mass deportation. Now, some major problems with implementing this program. First is the cost, but that can be overcome if Congress is willing to appropriate the money. Then there will be the legal fights that come from the immigrants themselves and their friends on the left, read that Democrats. The second problem is ensuring that the countries the administration will try to deport them to will take them back. Countries like China and Venezuela have said they will not allow deported individuals to return to their home country. Now that can be overcome by simply informing the deportee they will be ousted from the country and need to find a country that will take them. The other problem, which has not been addressed much, is how many people have been deported in the past illegally crossed the border once again. Though the data on deportees is somewhat limited, the evidence shows that people re-immigrate after deportation more frequently than many might expect. In fiscal 2020, for example, the federal government classified 40% of the deportations as reinstatement of removal, meaning that deportees had re-entered the United States after being removed in order to leave. A 2019 report from the Immigration Council, a pro-immigrant advocacy group, similarly noted that such reinstatements of removal generally make up 40% of deportations annually. So it's pretty much across the board. We know that's the problem. And from 2011 to 2020, approximately 1.3 million deportations affected people who've been ordered out of the country before. They return because they know they can get rehired by their employer if they get back in the country. And that's the genesis of how Trump can make this deportation plan work. In fact, it will also slow down the waves of immigrants trying to cross the border. In the past election, the data showed that a large number of black men abandoned the Democratic Party and voted for Trump. Hispanics also crossed party lines and supported Trump in record numbers. One of the reasons, in my opinion, this occurred was an economic one. Make no mistake, the vast majority of migrants crossing the border are doing so for economic reasons. They're coached on how to claim political asylum. But once those cases go before an immigration judge, the majority are denied. Not just the majority, the vast majority. Under the Biden administration, the percentage of those approved has climbed, but under Trump, those numbers should once again decline. But once they get here, they're competing for jobs with many black men and Hispanic men that are citizens. They're also willing to work for less, and employers will hire them to cut their costs. Now, I never thought much about this issue until I was building a house in Northern Virginia in 2005. We're going to sod the front and back lawns, and 2 tractor trailers full of sod were delivered. The head driver asked me when they were going to place the sod, a legitimate question since he didn't want it sitting on the pallets for several days. I replied it was my understanding to be the next day. He then said, quote, "They'll probably have 10 Mexicans do it," end quote. I nodded and said, "Probably." He then explained to me that it was an issue with him. His buddies, where he lived in Warrenton, about 30 miles south, used to build houses there in Northern Virginia. They were carpenters, bricklayers, electricians, painters, and sheetrockers. They could not get jobs now because once a crew went Hispanic, it went all Hispanic. It was for communication and security. Nobody would rat them out. And therein lies the solution. Congress needs to pass some stiff laws concerning the hiring of illegal immigrants. The penalty has to be on the employer. The first offense would be a stiff fine. The second would be triple the first fine. The third would be a felony to the highest ranking officer in the company or corporation. Now, how fast do you think corporations would put out memos dictating they must have conclusive proof of citizenship before someone's hired? Lack of English would be a first indicator. Halting English might also be an indicator. You know when you're hiring somebody that's not a citizen. E-Verify is a start, but it needs to be beefed up. Technology must be put in place to ensure that the verification is correct, and it's very doable. It will only take a few prosecutions of employers, particularly if it involves high-ranking corporate officers, and the hiring of illegal workers will come to a grinding halt. Then you have to couple that with the removal of all support for those that cross the border illegally. Now, I know that sounds draconian, but it will send a clear signal to those that want to cross the border it will not be worth the cost they have to pay to smugglers. It will also force a lot of immigrants to self-deport for lack of resources to stay in the U.S. Once you implement these strict measures, you can turn to an immigration bill. The Republicans could simply pass the bill they passed in the House last year and force the Democrats to try and filibuster in the Senate. So it would be at their own political risk. You could also include provisions to solve the DACA problem in the bill. You could go so far as to make a determination of how many immigrants we might need in our labor force. And for our purposes today, we'll assume that we have 15 million illegal immigrants in the country. And then remember, between 10 and 11 have entered in the last 4 years. We then decide that we need 5 million of those workers. Immigrants would then have to apply for some form of status in the country, basically giving them what would be a work permit. They would have to show how long they've been in the country. They would have to show they've been gainfully employed and have paid all applicable taxes. In addition, they have committed no crimes. And they would be given points in these categories, and those with the most points would go to the head of the line. That would basically eliminate just about every illegal immigrant that crossed in the last 4 years. And these are just some suggestions on how to approach this difficult problem, but make no mistake, we have to come up with a solution that works for the United States and the citizens of the United States. This has been To My Liberal Friends. Thanks for listening. If you enjoy the podcast, hit the subscribe button.